There you are. Good evening. Welcome. I call to order the study session of the Lakewood City Council for June 6, 2016. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Paul.
Here.
Wickman. Vincent.
Here.
Roybal.
Here.
Harrison.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Shakti.
Here.
Abel. Coop.
Here.
Franks.
Here.
Gutwein. You have a quorum.
Fantastic. Thank you. Welcome to those who made it out tonight. I think the severe weather has passed us, so your cars should be okay if they're not underneath us. We have a couple of nice informational items tonight, and I will start with item number 3, which is a presentation on our sustainability plan updates. Jonathan Wachtel. Good evening. Welcome.
Mayor, City Council, thank you for providing us some time with you this evening to give you an update on our efforts as a sustainability division and our work towards implementing the City of Lakewood Sustainability Plan, which was adopted in May of 2015. I'm Jonathan Wachtel. I'm the Sustainability Division Manager. Our division is located in the Planning Department. And I want to just acknowledge a couple staff members who have put a tremendous amount of work into both implementing the plan and helping us put together the annual report, which was in your packet and you should have a hard copy of. And that's our sustainability planner, Lynn Coppage, and our planning intern, Emily Alvarez. And they both are great assets to our division and to the community. Tonight, what I'd like to do is highlight a little bit about what we've been working on as a sustainability division, talk to you about some current issues and challenges that we are working towards, and then highlight the projects that are underway for 2016 and our future priorities for 2017, and then I'll be happy to take some questions from you. To start, I'll just review a little bit about how we got to where we are. Our sustainability was first mentioned in a formal way in the City of Lakewood in a section of the 2003 Lakewood Comprehensive Plan. And the first kind of formal organization within the city came in 2007 with the formation of a volunteer group of employees that formed the Employees Committee for a Sustainable Lakewood. And that's not really that long ago, and that committee worked to get an idea of what was happening within our city operations and helped to establish some of our now what seem long-standing annual events like the Earth Day celebration and the Sustainability Awards. I'll skip through the rest of the timeline up to the adoption or the formation of our sustainability division, which happened right at the end of 2012 and early 2013. And in just that short amount of time between then and now, we did our robust community process to get the sustainability plan developed, and then of course that was adopted last May. And when we adopted that, we made a commitment to council and to the community to provide annual updates on our progress, to review the targets and the goals that are in the plan and come present on what we've been working on to you. So that's why we are here tonight. And to give it a little context, this diagram is in the plan and in the annual report and now up on the screen. And this is really two important diagrams on how the City of Lakewood is approaching sustainability. Of course, in its essence, sustainability is making sure that our choices and our lifestyle and the decisions we make today don't compromise the ability for future generations to have a healthy and high quality of life. And to do that, I'll emphasize the overlapping circle diagram on the right side there. And that's really a framework that we are using in terms of our decision making, that when we look at our policies and our programs and make decisions, we need to equally consider the impacts that we might have on our economic prosperity, on the environmental health of Lakewood and the regional area and even the world, and of course our social well-being. But I want to point out also the other model, which is what we refer to as an embedded model. Because what's important is while the overlapping circle model talks about how we should consider equally those three pillars of a sustainable community in our decision making, the nested model really demonstrates how important it is that we have a healthy environment as a foundation to make sure that we have the ability to have a healthy community and then build a robust and vibrant economy. And so I want to talk for a few minutes about environmental challenges that we're facing. There's been a long history, of course. We always wrestle with economic development and and our choices and how those affect environmental health. And as a country, this goes back decades with a lot of environmental rules that we put in place to make sure we have clean air and clean water. Today, we're facing additional issues which have to do with the amount of greenhouse gases we put in the atmosphere and how that's affecting our climate. And so just real quick to kind of frame that challenge that we're also facing, I want to just remind you that the data shows us that over the evolution of human civilization, the average amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was around, averaged about 275 parts per million. And of course, over the last 160 years or so, we've been taking vast amounts of carbon that was stored in the ground and using it as fuels, and it's been a great way to help build our economy, but at a cost, and that is that those emissions into the air have increased the amount of carbon that's in our atmosphere. And currently, we emit close to 10 billion tons globally into the atmosphere. And we've now just recently, as of March of 2016, reached 403 parts per million in the atmosphere. And this is what that looks like when you put it into a trend over kind of the history of civilization. And what happens is that carbon gets in the air along with some other greenhouse gases, and it traps heat. And so the gases that normally would have escaped our atmosphere get stuck. And so what we're finding as a result is that we're increasing global temperatures. And currently, we've done that to the tune of 0.87 degrees Celsius, or about 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit. It's been a challenge to address this. There's obviously economic ramifications if you start to shift your systems, and it really takes a global effort. And the good news is that in 2015 in Paris, 195 countries, that's most of the world that has representation in governments, came together and adopted a legally binding agreement to work to keep those emissions to the point where it would keep us from cresting 2 degrees Celsius in a temperature increase. And that's the temperature at which scientists, our best scientists of the world, have agreed that there's a high likelihood that the impacts of that temperature rise would pose significant threats that may be irreversible for us, that might cause significant problems in terms of maintaining a balanced society in the world. And so why does that matter to Lakewood? I mean, these are big problems, and your jobs are to look at what is the role of a local government. And there is a role for cities to play here. It's not just big industry, and it's not just at a national level, because 1/3 of the carbon that can still be emitted and keep us under that threshold is coming out of our cities. And so cities are a major area where we can work to reduce our emissions and do our part. And just to give you a little perspective on this animation shows you on the outside ring, you can see that 2 degrees Celsius mark. That's where we don't want to cross. And you can see over time what the data shows in terms of the increase in global temperature. And you'll notice also that it gets closer to our current year, it accelerates. And that's because carbon builds up in the atmosphere and takes a very long time to be removed. So even if we start reducing our emissions immediately, there'll still be carbon in the atmosphere adding to the heat for quite a while. So scientists are really urging us to be quick in our actions. So let's bring this down to kind of what it means and what we see and feel. This chart shows you in the middle the typical temperature distribution of a day in the northern hemisphere in the summertime. And the area in blue is the distribution of below average days, and the area in red are those days that are above average. And up until about 30, 40 years ago is a pretty steady distribution. And what's happened over the last 3 or 4 decades is that it's rapidly shifted to give us far more days above average than historical. And we're feeling that. A study right here in Colorado looked at the number of 90-plus degree days in the city of Fort Collins, and from 1960 to about the year 2000, on average there were 18 days that were 90 degrees or warmer in the city of Fort Collins. And just between the years 2000 and 2013, that number's almost doubled to close to 34 days. You can feel that. That's a tangible shift in our climate. We participated with a group of other regional governments, with the Colorado Municipal League and the Rocky Mountain Climate Organization last year, to look at all the data and learn what's really happening in Colorado as a result of shifts in our climate. And what the data is showing us is that in Colorado, we've increased our temperature by 2 degrees over the past 30 years. And that under a medium to low emission scenario, meaning that we start to reduce the amount of emissions we put in to the atmosphere at a pretty high level, even under those conditions, we're looking at reaching a 2.5 to 5 degree increase by the year 2050. That's a pretty significant impact. Other impacts that were identified from the science and the research and the data included increased extreme weather events, which we've seen, significant increases in our freeze-thaw days. Sometimes it's these small things that seem inconsequential that can really wreak havoc on a city. The more freeze-thaw days, those days that the temperature fluctuates above and below the freezing mark, can make significant impacts to our infrastructure, our streets and our bridges and our stormwater pipes, and can end up costing a lot of money. I'm not going to go through all of these impacts, but all of these added up together go back to thinking about those overlapping circles, these extreme heat days, pest outbreak, new types of public health concerns that haven't been prevalent in Colorado. These all cause potential impacts to our economic well-being and to our social well-being along with the environment. And businesses in the private sector are really taking notice of this because they realize that there's significant impacts that are potential to their business operations, their supply chain, and how they operate. And 70% of S&P 500 companies are now not only reporting their emissions as an entity, but also identifying the risks to infrastructure as a result of climate and other impacts that might hurt their businesses. And they're doing this because the investment community wants to know if they're taking account of this before they'll invest money. And so it's in the private sector. It's not just a academic exercise at this point to look at these potential impacts. 1,000 of the world's largest companies have established an internal price for their carbon emissions. 58 of the world's largest companies have now committed to go to 100% renewable energy. So the private sector is taking action, and in turn is looking at cities and saying, what are you doing to address these problems? They don't want to invest themselves in communities that aren't taking action to be resilient to impacts of climate change. And a lot of these companies that are included in the list, in the numbers I just presented, have a local tie to Lakewood, whether they operate here or some of our major employers. That includes Terumo and Lockheed Martin and Excel and Miller Coors. So what does this mean for us? We have a big problem, which is we've got too much carbon, and we've got another problem, which are there's impacts. And what we need to do, and what we're working on as a division, is to identify what are the opportunities as a city, in our organization and community-wide, to reduce our emissions. What are our specific ways of doing that here in Lakewood? And what are our specific risks and vulnerabilities? What is it that these impacts might do to our operations and to the well-being of our community? And so our first big task is to identify those things. And then we can use our collective resources, our brain power, and innovate and adapt and make sure that we're building a resilient Lakewood that can withstand disruption and can be sustainable and resilient into the future. So that's really the foundation of the sustainability division. And the good news is we're doing this. We're reporting our emissions, and we're taking the time to look and see where our opportunities are. And I'll remind those of you that were involved with the sustainability plan, and for those of you that weren't, we took on a big task during that planning process, which was looking at every strategy proposed in the plan and doing some detailed work to understand if we implemented those strategies, how that might help us reduce our emissions. And so those detailed calculators that we built were customized to Lakewood and took a ton of factors into account. And in the end, we were able to identify an opportunity by implementing the strategies in our plan of reducing over 400,000 metric tons of carbon as a community. And that's how we set the target that you see in the plan of a 20% emissions reduction by 2025. And we can do that by implementing our plan. And here's what that looks like. It's very doable. It's 2% reduction per year. And I would say that not only should we challenge ourselves to make sure we hit this, and I think we can, but also to try to overshoot and see if we can't do better than that and reassess that target ahead of 2025. To illustrate what those looked like, those calculators, here are the top 5 strategies, specific strategies in the plan that were assessed that can help us reduce that. And most of these have to do with renewable energy transmission, becoming more efficient as far as reducing energy use. So for example, number 2 there, Sustainable Energy and Water Resource Center, that would be a task of the city to collect all of the information on how residents and businesses could take advantage of programs for energy conservation, for financing improvements in their businesses, of investing in renewable energy, and making sure all that information was available and that we were providing guidance to our residents and our businesses. And back to those calculators, when we came up with that, we looked around the country. We said, who is doing something similar? What kind of participation did they get? What kind of energy were they able to save? And we were able to take all that data and apply it to our energy system and run the numbers and say, if we're successful, as the average models have been other places, here's what that might do for us in terms of energy reduction and then greenhouse gas emission reduction. So we've been very careful and thorough, and we're trying to really use the data to inform our planning and our decision-making and our implementation. All that being said, remember, we do want to make the decisions and work towards implementation considering all 3 pieces of the sustainability puzzle there, of the stool. So it can't just be about greenhouse gas emissions. And so also in the plan and in looking at our prioritization, we built these assessments to not just look at greenhouse gas emission, but to look at how each strategy in the plan would also benefit ecosystem health, self-reliance, household bottom line, community cohesion, and public health. And what's on your screen is just a screenshot of one of the dozen of these that are in our sustainability plan after each goal area. So as I go into the highlights of this year, I also just want to talk a little bit about the lens and where we're focusing our work. And we do this across a lot of scales. One is looking internally and making sure that we are doing the best we can internally with our own municipal operations, making sure that we're figuring out, if we can figure out how to implement a lot of these strategies ourselves, and we can take that information and pass it on to the community. And also, that's an area where we have a lot of control. We can decide we're going to change our light bulbs in all of our street lights, our street signals, and we can save that energy. We can look at our own operations, and we have a fair amount of control, so it's a great area of opportunity. Of course, we're working citywide. Our approach citywide is always to first look at ways that we can educate and do outreach and enable leaders in our community and residents and businesses to become more sustainable. And then regionally is also very important, because as many of you know, we are not in direct control of a lot of the big systems that we rely on. Energy being a great example. We're in Xcel's territory, but we don't run energy as a municipal utility. Transportation is kind of partly in our realm and partly regional. We have multiple, dozens of water districts. So a lot of times we don't have direct control, and it's important that we not only work to build those relationships and work collaboratively with those regional entities, but that we educate ourselves and understand how those systems work and what the role is for Lakewood within those big regional systems. So in the annual report, one thing I do really want to point out is that the appendix contains a tremendous amount of data. And one thing that set the sustainability plan apart from some of the other plans that we've adopted in the city is that it's metric-based. So for every written goal in the plan, there was also a measurable target that went with it. So for example, if we said it's a goal that we should increase the amount of energy that we're getting from renewable sources, it didn't just have that language. It said, let's do that. Let's make it 45% from renewable by 2025. And because we had all those metrics, the advantage is we can measure our progress and we can see how we're doing. Many of the strategies have multiple steps and will take a long time to implement. And so we identified, along with those targets, a long list of what we call sustainability indicators, which are little bits of information that help us see, are we making progress? If we set something in motion, if we create a program, is that having an impact? Are we moving the needle in the direction we want? And that will really help us understand how well we're doing towards those goals, and also reassess our strategies if they're not working and keep us accountable. So in the back of this annual report, one of the biggest projects of the year was looking through the 90-plus metrics that were in the plan and figuring out where we were getting that data, what that looks like, setting our baseline so we can start measuring in the future. And so that's really exciting that's there. And you'll notice there's some gaps because there's data we still need to collect or things that aren't yet available. But it's a pretty big undertaking. At a broad scale this year, the sustainability division led or were partners in 51 different projects in support of implementing this plan. To the best of our ability to track it, we engaged through our projects and programs about 9,400 Lakewood residents. We partnered with more than 50 organizations at a local, regional, national scale. And we received 2 accolades that we're very proud of. One, we were named a semifinalist in the Harvard University Innovations in American Government program for our Sustainable Neighborhoods program developed here in Lakewood. And we were recognized for the sustainability plan and our work to assess the greenhouse gas emission reduction potentials in an international publication of innovative approaches of the cities are taking to work on these challenges. So we're very proud of both of those. I mentioned a lot of these before, but just to keep in mind as I give you the highlights, we identified implementation off the bat here with a lot of lenses. One was we knew we needed to get infrastructure in place to communicate, to do outreach to the community to support every one of our implementation strategies, and we needed to collect data, so that was a big part of the year. We wanted to work first on projects with the highest potential to reduce emissions. We also, to maximize our limited staff and resources, look for any opportunity we can to partner across the organization with other departments and divisions in the city on projects, and regionally when there's opportunities so we can get the most out of our time. We looked for opportunities to catalyze the great leadership in the community from residents and businesses and organizations that are helping push us to advance sustainability, and of course prioritized many of our projects based on the ability to help them make a difference and also to respond to community concerns and needs. And then, as I mentioned, we also look internally to make sure we know what we're doing before we go and ask the community to do things that we haven't figured out for ourselves. So I'm going to quickly breeze through each chapter. It'll be quick, and then I'll take some questions. The climate change and adaptation chapter, this year we really focused on the data and the reporting. This is where we needed to understand where our emissions come from so we can understand the nuance involved and the opportunities. We reported to the Carbon Disclosure Project, the same place that all those Fortune 500 companies are reporting their emissions and risks. City of Lakewood is part of that, along with hundreds of other cities as an international reporting platform. And we're one of 500 plus cities around the globe that have committed to the Compact of Mayors, which is another platform for cities to commit to reporting and updating their progress towards reducing emissions. We are currently underway with updating our greenhouse gas inventory. The baseline that we have was conducted in 2011. And so it's time to update that and make sure that our baseline is realistic and so we can track our progress. And we've identified as a very high priority working towards that, identifying those specific vulnerabilities that we may face as a community with a change in climate conditions. The Energy, Water, and Built Environment chapter, this is a great example of us looking regionally to build relationships and also the data collection piece. And so this year, we really needed to figure out where our opportunities are for energy and understand how the system works. So we worked collaboratively with 12 other municipalities in the region who also were struggling to have the right amount of data available in terms of their energy use to meet their goals, and we worked with the Planning Utilities Commission, and we were successful. And Xcel Energy, for the first time, will be providing us a community report that instead of just giving us kind of total kilowatt hours used, we will all know how many customers in the city of Lakewood are have installed solar panels or are bought into the wind programs or are taking advantage of demand side management programs. That's going to really help us focus our efforts. And we also know that these are complex systems and need to learn a lot about it. And so we're underway educating ourselves, and actually one of our priorities is around energy education. And we'll be coming back to all of you with an opportunity to sit in on some sessions to learn about kind of the role of local government in the context of our energy system and how that works and what our role is, so that we can inform decision making. And when Xcel comes and talks to you about their programs, you'll have a stronger context on how that works. And of course, I mentioned the Energy, Water, and Resource Center. That's also a high priority. Sustainable Economy chapter 3 of the plan. This is an example where we really leveraged opportunities. There were grants coming in from the county that we were able to collaborate with, and we worked, many of you are familiar with the Hometown Colorado project, We worked with graduate students to look at local food assets, and we got some great data as a result, and that's a jumping off point for our next priorities, which will be to continue to look for ways to increase our local food production. It's a topic that's highly important to a lot of our residents, and also looking at ways to get local food production from people's yards or from community gardens into the marketplace. There's a lot of economic opportunity, and that'll help us be more resilient as a community. We also worked with one of those classes on looking at ways to engage our business community, and so looking at business certification or other programs to connect our sustainability goals and the business community is also a high priority, and that's a two-way street. Really, we have a ton we can learn from the private sector on how they're becoming more efficient, that hopefully we can learn from them as much as we'll share that direction. Zero waste chapter of the plan. This was probably the most highly discussed topic through the entire planning process, and there's a lot of interest from the community that we heard of making sure we start thinking in a zero waste mentality, and that's kind of made us say, well, what does that really mean? What does a zero waste system mean? So to start, we looked internally, and what we figured out is that really that whole way of thinking takes the discussion from, okay, I've got a product and I'm done with it. What the heck is the right thing to do when I get rid of it? Does it go to the trash or can it be recycled? To looking at the whole life cycle of that product. How was it manufactured? What is it made of? Does it have a long useful life? And when it's done, can it be repurposed? And so we looked internally to start examining what does that mean as an organization. And so we've worked with our purchasing finance department to look at what it means to start purchasing things that have a better life cycle and an ability to repurpose at the end. We've introduced new waste streams, including compost, to the Civic Center. We've created resources and materials for the city so that we can make sure that all of our meetings and events have the potential to become zero waste. And we've created toolkits and outreach materials for the community so that they can do this as well. And I think we've been pretty successful. We've got some good data on this. We added the compost collection to the Civic Center in 2015, and in that first year, we kept over 20,000 pounds of waste out of the landfill strictly through that additional waste bin, which is great. And when you add that to the recycling collection that was already taking place here, our estimates, due to all the outreach and emphasis on this project, increased our diversion rate in 1 year in the two Civic Center buildings from 30% to 65%, which is about a 30% increase. So we're pretty proud of that, and we think we can take that even further. On the maybe not as positive side, the best research we've been able to do shows us that we have probably a community diversion rate, so the percentage of waste not going to landfills at about only 12% community-wide. So that takes me to our future priorities. We'd like to take what we've learned and start addressing some of the concerns we've heard from the community around residential recycling. And I'll take a quick detour because I know this is a topic of particular interest to many of you. Just to update you where we are, this was a topic that we were instructed to address rather quickly after the adoption of the sustainability plan as a high priority. And we heard a lot of varying opinions. And what we wanted to do as staff was, with our role being the most appropriate thing to do, is to collect as much data as possible so we understand exactly how our system is operating, where opportunities may or may not exist, what concerns are out there. And so currently, as you're aware, there's a survey out in the community being conducted to be statistically significant to get a lot of that information. We're collecting data through a lot of other means, including traffic counts of trucks on streets, and we're researching models from communities all over the country that have similar challenges to understand what worked, what didn't, and cost, benefits, impacts. And so we're committed to coming back with all of that data, synthesizing it, and coming to council in fall 2016 with a huge range of potential options for council to consider in terms of addressing residential waste. And if you have questions, we'll be happy to answer that after we're done with the rest of this. So that's our, obviously, an underway priority. And then looking down the road, there'll be a lot of opportunity to work on commercial and multifamily programs and construction and demolition waste as well. Chapter 5 of the plan is about community cohesion and public health. This is a great example where we really just catalyze our community, and we've had great success. And many of you are familiar with the Sustainable Neighborhoods program. In 2015, we welcomed our 4th certified sustainable neighborhood with Lake Lockwood Village. The program as a whole, in the 5 neighborhoods in the program, engaged close to 3,000 residents through workshops and events that they put on and organized with a little bit of staff support behind the scenes. And their projects, and just keep in mind, they identify these projects. It's all volunteer time that goes to putting these together. Those projects, the range that were conducted in 2015, supported 14 of the 16 planned goals. So this is an incredible mechanism to help residents work on advancing sustainability in the community. And we'll come back in August to welcome our 5th outstanding certified neighborhood. The South of 6th neighborhood just reached their goal actually last week. So we'll be back to celebrate and recognize them with you. We also spent a lot of time building our supportive tools. So we built out we now have a sustainability newsletter. It goes out monthly. You can sign up to get that, which updates you on our projects and what we're working on. We expanded significantly our social media presence, and we developed a brand new website. And in addition, we just launched a new innovative program, which we're really excited about, that we're calling the Lakewood Sustainability Cooperative, or the SCOOP. And this is a program that enables us to collect the interests and skills of residents in Lakewood and businesses and organizations that want to help advance sustainability in the community. And we get inquiries over the last few years on almost a weekly basis of people who have an interest and a skill and want to know if they can volunteer and help out. And so this is a way that we're going to be able to capture all of their skills and interests, and then as projects arise, we can reach into this database and go out to the community and leverage their expertise. So a great way to build community and help implement the plan. So the Lakewood Scoop is underway. Other high priorities are to continue to support sustainable neighborhoods, build more resources for them, and we'd love to expand that program. And then looking at ways that we can integrate arts and culture and sustainability as part of outreach and community building. Chapter 6 of the plan is about natural systems, and there weren't any particularly large projects that originated with our sustainability division in 2015, but that doesn't mean that the city doesn't do a tremendous amount when it comes to protecting natural systems. And of course, our parks, community resources department and our parks, urban parks and regional parks do a tremendous job managing our parklands and taking care of our natural resources and engaging residents. And then in our neighborhoods, one of the great sustainable neighborhood projects this year was the Be Safe Neighborhood program out of the Iber neighborhood. And that really forwards a tremendous amount of the goals in our sustainability plan around natural systems by talking to residents about how they take care of their land, what kind of plants they're putting in the ground, what kind of chemicals they're using to protect pollinators. And that's been incredibly successful. They keep coming back asking for more support in terms of getting materials out. And of course, the city does a variety of other things to help protect water quality and air quality through the development process, and we've done a tremendous amount of outreach through our various programs. Underway is agricultural stewardship. That goes back to the Be Safe program and other ways that we can help as urban agriculture seems to increase, making sure that people are taking care of their property and of the land. And we've identified the importance of working on some of our green infrastructure and biodiversity inventorying as another high priority going forward. And then finally, transportation. We spent a lot of time looking at data this year to try to understand where to focus our efforts, and the news is both positive and a little difficult difficult challenges at the same time. We've seen an increase in transit ridership, which helps get single occupancy vehicles off the road and helps emissions and air quality. But we also saw an increase in people driving alone to work. We've got great miles of bike routes and trails, but we've also got a tremendous amount that have missing segments. So we learned probably what we already had a hunch about. And then in terms of city leadership and what we implemented, we collaborated with regional entities to do air quality control through the Air Quality Council, worked well with the Lakewood Bicycle Advisory Team to do some education and outreach on bike safety. And then we've been looking internally, once again, if we can figure out how as an organization we can help our employees take fewer trips in single occupancy vehicles, become multimodal, then we can take that experience and pass it along to our businesses. And so we worked with Dr. Cog's Go-Tober Challenge. We worked with some students to look at what a comprehensive commuter strategy looks like for an organization and a business. We've worked with RTD, and we're working with a local bike store to put together, and we'll be unveiling in the next couple months a very robust multimodal commuter program for our employees, and we'll be able to start tracking how well that works, and we'll learn from it. And hopefully next year we'll come back with some data. So the employee community program's underway, and then high priorities into the future include working with the Traffic Engineering Division and the Comprehensive Planning Division to work on a multimodal transportation plan across the entire city. So to wrap things up, a lot of big, heavy topics and difficult challenges related to sustainability, but I want to end on a positive note. Renewable energy capacity has increased 710% in the U.S. That's just solar capacity between 2006 and 2015. The costs are coming down, and we're at that point where it becomes just as cost effective to go solar, and that's a great thing in terms of reducing our emissions and becoming sustainable. We've had a 590% increase in wind power capacity in the U.S. since 2006. Our local food systems are bustling, 180% increase in the number of farmers markets in the country between 2007 and 2014, and a 430% increase in the number of school districts that have farm-to-school programs getting healthy food into our schools. $6 billion are estimated in sales of local food in the U.S. on an annual basis. These are great trends that should make us feel very positive and hopeful about successfully implementing sustainability. When it comes to transportation, we've seen a 22 times increase in the number of car share memberships, a 63% increase in bicycle commuting in the 70 largest U.S. cities. And over 200,000 miles ridden through bike share in just Denver in the first year that they operated B-Cycle. So the trends are there. We have a lot of challenges, but we also can see some significant headway, and we can be part of it in Lakewood, and we appreciate the opportunity to help move the community forward and all the leadership from council. And with that, I will take your questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir. Very well done. Thank you, Jonathan, Lynn, Emily. We appreciate it. I think one of the cool things that you kept describing over and over is that the city's taking this on internally first to try to lead by example. And there's really nothing in any of this that has been mandated. We're trying to do best practices and learn together. So it's a win-win. And I got to say, to be honored as a finalist at Harvard and the program that you helped create, it's really cool. I hear a lot about it through other communities wanting to take that sustainable neighborhood to their own. So hats off. All right, we got quite a few questions. I want to, if we could, go chapter to chapter on this, and we could start with chapter 1, climate change and adaptation, and that way we can kind of keep the focus, and we'll keep moving on if that's cool. All right. So, with that said, Councilor Franks, you're on.
I'm not sure if mine fits perfectly into one of the buckets, so.
If it doesn't fit into the bucket, go for it.
All right.
Just throw it out of the bucket. But we'll try to stick to that.
Absolutely. Basically, I'm a big recycler, composter, so this is all really exciting to me. But I've been seeing on the news in different things where sometimes we think we're doing a good thing, like we're recycling electronics or we're doing the composting, and the product doesn't really end up where it's supposed to go. And I want to understand how Lakewood is kind of vetting out maybe the suppliers on the back end to make sure that the either composting or electronics recycling actually does get recycled, rather than, again, some of these exposés that have been done show that these things don't end up where. And so I just want people to understand that we're doing our job well and these things are really ending up where they should.
That's a really good and important question, and the electronic waste contract does not sit in the sustainability division. That's through our public works department, but I can't answer to it because we work closely with them, and every piece of electronic waste that's collected through city events or operations is verified that it's properly disposed of. We even get certificates back to make sure that the hard drives have been certifiably cleared and recycled in a proper manner. So those are all very carefully vetted, so we'd make sure that they are going to the right place. With the composting and the recycling, we have actually taken tours of the facilities where our materials are being hauled, and so we can see how they're processed and what's happening with those. So we feel fairly confident that things are ending up in the right place, at least what we have a purview over from city disposal. Yeah.
Councilor Shakti.
Mine isn't in chapter 1.
Okay. Turn you back on or hit your light again or do it when we do it. Mayor Pro Tem Johnson.
Thank you. I appreciate your presentation, Jonathan. I don't know that mine fits into the way that you've got it structured either. I do have some questions. On page 20, we have that we provided funding and support for grid alternatives to increase solar access for low-income Lakewood residents. Do we have any idea how much we spent there?
I don't have that number, but that's through the Community Development Block Grant Program. So I can get back to you with a specific number, but that was a pass-through of the CDBG funds.
And also on page 24, we've got to increase the percentage of households to 60% in the CDBG, and it goes on. And there was another place to increase the percentage of households above living wage standards. I guess, just take my question for what it's worth. Is this really a city responsibility for us to look at increasing the number of households above a living wage standard? I'm struggling with that.
Oh, yeah. That's a target that was established during the planning process for the sustainability plan and adopted in 2015. And it relates to ensuring that we have a robust local community and within our sustainable economy section. And so that's a metric that's pretty commonly used by communities to gauge whether or not they have a acceptable level living wage and quality of life for residents in the community. And so it's a target that is there for us to measure, but that's not the strategy. To achieve that, there's a whole suite of strategies that would help a household get there, which include reducing the percentage of their household income they may spend on transportation and housing. So the ways that a city could help that would be to make sure that we have transportation options in proximity to where people live. We talk about making sure that we have good partnerships and availability of social services, of workforce development and educational opportunities. So the role that the city plays to achieving that target really have to do with all the typical amenities and services and functions that a city would have, like education, like workforce development, social services. So hopefully those are the mechanisms we use, and that target is just something we can measure against and see how we're doing. That's the intent.
Thank you. I think those are lofty goals. For me personally, when I look at what the role of our city is, I look at police, parks, and pavement. And I'm starting to struggle with the way that we are going out in different directions. That's just me. Okay, I noticed that part of your metric was social equality. Could I please get a definition for what that means and how we as a city should be ensuring social equality?
Do you have a specific
It was on your diagram.
of the
Three things.
the fundamental concepts of sustainability.
Yeah.
Social equity is equity is the specific term that is used there, and that's really looking at do we provide opportunities for all of our residents to access, parks, recreation, resources that are provided to the community. Is that equitably available across our entire community? That's the concept there.
Okay. I noticed that you mentioned the survey that is out there now.
Mm-hmm.
And also on page 30, we have to achieve 60% residential diversion rate.
Now, can we stick to these chapters, because I think people have questions along those lines. So we'll get to waste here in a minute. If you want to, you kind of broke us into chapter 2 and 3, if we could maybe stick there now.
Okay, I'm happy to come back. I need to have some questions
Yeah,
answered.
absolutely. We'll get there. Just want to make sure everybody gets a chance to get their questions as we go. Councilor Harrison.
I'm going to go back to chapter 1, and I just barely speak sustainable. So what I need you to do is help define, how do you measure a carbon? Does it weigh something? Does it fit in a box? How do you measure a carbon? Because that is a fundamental I don't have.
That is an incredibly good question and an incredibly difficult thing to answer. The way that you can measure carbon changes depending on what, or greenhouse gas emissions, depends on the source and how, each source has kind of a different metric or a methodology for how it's measured. So when it comes to our energy use, which is a pretty huge percentage of where our emissions come from, Xcel, our public service company, actually provides us with a number that is what they call their emissions factor. And so they've calculated, based on how they generate their entire energy mix, a certain percentage from coal, a certain percentage from wind, a certain percentage from hydro, et cetera, how much is emitted, whether that's through a smokestack or through other means, what it takes to generate that energy. They've calculated that emission factor for us, which is nice. So they give us that ratio, and then we can look at how many kilowatts of energy we're using based on that ratio and calculate our carbon emission for our community based on that. The emissions are organized, and it's really complex, into 3 different scopes. So scope 1 emissions are those that really come from the generation of energy. Scope 2 are those emissions that we create on our own within our boundaries. So think about every time you drive your car and there's emissions coming out of your tailpipe, and that gets calculated based on the mix of cars that we have in our community. That can be calculated through a lot of different methodologies, and part of what we spent this year doing was working to understand kind of the standard emerging practices on the best way to measure that. And then we look at the total vehicle miles traveled, and we can do the mathematics that say, okay, here's overall miles traveled, and here's the average type of emission for all of the cars that are registered within Lakewood, and we can figure out that emissions factor. So those are the scope 2 are the ones we generate kind of on site within our community. And then the real trick is calculating the scope 3 emissions, which are our materials that maybe were manufactured outside of our municipal boundary and that are purchased here. So the scope 3 oftentimes are not included in the assessments, or key scope 3 emissions are, like waste, for example. And that has its own methodology as well, because it releases, methane is the big greenhouse gas associated with landfills. So then you have to figure out how much is going to landfills and do the calculations there. But there's a whole field behind it, and what's good is that there's been a standardization of that methodology, so now we can be part of the world community in terms of how we do all of that calculating, and so it's consistent. And I think what's most important is not necessarily the final actual number, but the trend, right? We need to make sure that we measure these things in a consistent way, so that even if it's not perfect in its methodology, we can see if by using that, calculating things in the same way over and over again, we can see that we're moving in the right direction in reducing it.
May I follow? Are we then comparing what the city of Lakewood spends in carbon footprint to what the city of Denver spends in carbon in terms of percentage, or is it just what we do here in the city of Lakewood? Because how do you know how many trips I drive a day?
That data comes from the Regional Council of Governments. They put out every 5 years or so vehicle miles traveled, and they break it down by community. So oftentimes we use whatever data makes the most sense, and we work with the other jurisdictions so that we are using the same data so that it's all relative. Now, does it really matter how we compare to Denver or our emissions per person? I would say that, in the big picture, the atmosphere can only handle a certain amount. The carbon in the atmosphere affects our temperature, and we need to reduce that globally. We need to really just focus on Lakewood and try to reduce ours. But it is useful to benchmark against other communities because we can learn from them, right? They instituted a new program or or took some action that really they saw a significant reduction. And because they're measuring and we're measuring, we can learn from that and then replicate that for the city of Lakewood and vice versa. And so we do share that data with each other and use that to, kind of make sure that we're making progress and doing our part.
Okay, last question. Probably not my last, but the one I can think of right now. So most of this is educated guessing.
Is there some estimation that gets involved? Yes, but I would say it's not. It's a little stronger than educated guessing. It's a pretty scientific process. The methodologies were developed at at institutes of higher education that have been studying these things and coming up with methodology, and scientists around the world have been working on it to make it pretty reliable and consistent. So.
Well, I agree that we need to have a place to start measurement. So I'm just trying to understand how are you doing that. So thank you.
Of course.
Councilor Vincent,
I think I'm in 3.
1, 2, or 3. That's
Oh,
where it was opened up to. So
Okay. On chapter 3, there was a question, or there was one of the things that you're looking at on the slide was a complete neighborhood index for the food sources. What's covered in that?
That is to be determined. The strategy that was developed by the public working group on that chapter during the planning process, the idea behind that builds off of the idea of defining what makes a complete neighborhood, and what would that mean for the city of Lakewood. So that would be looking at things like, does a neighborhood have access to transit? Are there parks? Are there grocery stores? Are there recreation centers? Are there local serving businesses? Is it walkable? All of those elements would be part of defining what a complete neighborhood is. And we haven't done that yet. We do have the 20-minute neighborhood plan that comprehensive planning developed around the Sheridan station. And that's a great foundation for building off of to create that definition for Lakewood. But the vision of what that implementation process would look like would be to first look at the city of Lakewood and figure out what the appropriate definition is of a complete neighborhood for Lakewood, and then look and see where those exist, and examine opportunities for, increasing the amount of people that can call complete neighborhoods their home in the city of Lakewood.
So you hope to have some input into that then from some of the same people maybe who were on this?
I think that's a potential. We haven't gotten that far as to figure out how we're going to get there. We haven't started. That's a future priority. We haven't started implementation. But certainly there would be a public process to help that. I mean, I think that's an obvious opportunity to engage with the community and talk about what makes a complete neighborhood.
Okay, and this is a good thing.
Yep.
Councilor Coop and I had an opportunity to visit the new Montessori school that's opening up, and they have already reached out to the Sprout City Farm to get their kids involved in that, and so that they can learn about locally produced food and learn how to garden and everything. So I think that's just a wonderful, probably result of some of this information. So thank you.
That's great.
Councilor Wickman.
You've given us a very good reiteration of what our global problem is and our goals, and appreciate that. But I want to reemphasize that that's only half an equation. Identifying the problem, get our goals. The other half is the solution. And there's an awful lot of devil in the details in our solutions. Now, you haven't really given us much tonight, so I'm not going to go into the weeds. But when the time comes, when we're looking at resolutions, I want to be very clear that we're looking at things that are incentives, cooperation. I don't want to see government mandates and that sort of stuff. So, little heads up, when the time comes, I'll be looking at those details to your solutions. And that's just as important as the problem.
Councilor Abel.
Thank you. Couple of things in Chapter 1. The gasoline vehicles emissions are 19% of the total, and diesel 4% of the total. Are we thinking about such steps as better traffic flow to reduce idling vehicles as an action step?
I mean, I think that's a one of options in the tool bag of how to reduce tailpipe emissions. That's a big area. You know, when we adopted the sustainability plan, the comprehensive plan was adopted kind of hand in hand, and the comprehensive plan has a really robust transportation section with a long list of opportunities and strategies. And so I would say that the sustainability plan is not as strong in its array of transportation strategies because there was so much in the comp plan, and we didn't feel like we needed to, to duplicate the strategies that were in there. But that doesn't mean that we won't be working with the implementation of those strategies. And so like the multimodal transportation plan, timing of our traffic signals to keep things moving, overall transportation infrastructure is going to be a critical piece to reducing our emissions and protecting air quality. So absolutely.
It seems to me as though the comp plan also is light on details for vehicular traffic, heavy on details for alternative methods of transportation, which is necessary. But let's don't forget that this is the West, and folks are tied to their pickup trucks and automobiles.
Councilor Roybal, can
Noted.
I follow up to that?
I am not.
On the question you asked about the.
Certainly make a note of it, and we'll address it when I'm through here. I have a couple other things I'd rather bring up on chapters 1 and 3.
It's a follow up to what you.
I understand what you're saying. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Sir.
I'm listening. Go ahead.
So to that point, Dr. Cog, do we have some data from when they've tried to time Kipling and Wadsworth and some of our major thoroughfares to see what kind of drop we've had in emissions based on the timing of lights? And do you utilize that?
The traffic engineering folks do have that data, and they've been very successful. I don't have that in front of me, but I'm happy to get that and follow up.
To help you, Mr. Mayor, there was a recent article in the Denver Post, I believe it was, about, or maybe it was the Lakewood Sentinel, about the efficiency of traffic on Kipling these days. And that's a couple of thoroughfares I think we need to incorporate the existing vehicular traffic. That's my only point there. Also, Lakewood and Jefferson County have long been among the most harshest places in the United States. Is that we also now are encouraging chickens and goats and calves and sheep. And I believe that the methane produced by animal waste is a large component of greenhouse emissions. They're nowhere on this chart.
That is a source of emissions. It's not big enough to register within the context of the rest of these sources for us at this point.
Okay, I guess that depends
That
on
doesn't
which
mean that-
source you depend on, but I've heard it's a major concern. The other question I have is about stormwater, clean water, and returning it to the water courses to meet all the different levels of quality that the state requires. And it's my understanding that a good portion of our stormwater is sent downstream through irrigation ditches and carrying with it all the pollutants from the roads, the runoff from lawns and such as that. Are we addressing that at all? Is that a concern?
Water quality and those kind of pollutants are definitely a concern. It's not necessarily an area that I have the expertise to respond in great deal to, but I can tell you that with every development over a certain size, there are requirements that water quality and detention have to be in place, so that helps. That's one big step in protecting our water quality. The targets in the plan related to water quality are in the chapter 7 or 6, I believe, in the natural systems. And we did do look at all the water bodies that are tested within the city of Lakewood by the Colorado Department of Health and Environment. And there is one water body that did test, I think, for E. coli in the lower Bear Creek watershed, which is actually barely in the city of Lakewood and primarily in Denver. So those are in the plan. Strategies like, the Morse Park Rain Garden and design that helps, use vegetation to slow one-off and clean water are really critical. And I mentioned that, agricultural stewardship was one of the priority areas. That's the specific intent there is, how can we do outreach and education to really help people make good choices when it comes to the kind of chemicals and applications they put on their yard, how they manage their urban agriculture, so that we minimize the amount of materials that are flowing, from the landscape into our waterways. With the agricultural ditches, I'm not sure I have an answer for that. I don't know, if that's something Lakewood monitors or if the ag ditches do.
It's not what the ditch companies are doing, it's what we're doing. We're channeling our wastewater to irrigation ditches and evacuating a lot of storm water that way. And I didn't mean to jump ahead to chapter 6 from chapter 3, but we're talking energy, water, and the environment. So, but thank you.
Siri said thank you. Councilor Shakti.
Thank you. It's I very much appreciate the analytical approach, and it covers a lot of ground, so there's a lot of data to be gathered and stuff to be thought about. One of the things that struck me was sort of the way the interrelationship between the plan and the regional efforts. And it's sort of like from being on the Regional Air Quality Council and then Dr. Cog and the Bear Creek Watershed Group, to see the projects conceptualized at a regional level and then how they're implemented at the local level is interesting. And good to see that cooperation. And then, so my specific question, it stood out to me because Dr. Cog is working on their planning efforts and they have a similar indicator. So page 22, increase the percentage of households to 60%. And Dr. Cog's looking at in general, this is in CDBG qualified neighborhoods spending less than 45% of their income on housing and transportation costs. And I was confused by the 2013 92%.
Yeah, we may have already accomplished our goal, is what we found out when we went to go measure. So we can check that off if that's satisfactory to us. So, because we have invested in great transportation infrastructure, it certainly appears that our numbers are in a very good place in terms of keeping that number down. And the reason that it's focused in CDBG qualified areas is important to note, which is that it's not necessarily a bad thing if a household chooses to spend more than 45% of its income on housing and transportation. That's a function of, how much income do you have to spend. So if you are lucky enough to be able to spend more than 45% and still meet the rest of your basic needs, that's great. So we don't need to set that target across the whole community. But by using our CDBG qualified areas, we can look at our areas that have a little lower income, where they'll most likely be households that if they're spending more than that 45%, could have significant difficulty meeting their other basic needs for living. So that's how we set that target.
Thank you. And I guess that would go to the fact that I mean, here we don't have two, but I was impressed by how many of the areas we saw improvement in, which speaks to what the city's doing, but also to what the people in Lakewood are doing. So,
Councilor Roybal.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. I want to get back to Charlie Abel's comment about vehicle transportation. And I just wanted to make sure that possibly if you had a thought of the future. And now that we're having a lot of high-density building and we're going straight up, and again, in Colorado, you don't leave your truck very far or your vehicle very far. They're going to take it with them if they can. So my thought is, have you given any consideration of the future of the vehicles that are coming in to Lakewood and how that's going to impact the city?
I mean, I think that's something that is taken into account across all of our planning functions and from our engineering Traffic Engineering Division. I think the strategy going forward is that you have to build infrastructure so that people have choices, and you have to build a range of housing and neighborhoods and housing types so that people can make choices, so that if somebody wants to choose to live a life where they can rely on public transportation and a bicycle and a car share system and be multimodal, that we have the infrastructure in place to facilitate that personal choice to do that, and that's going to help take vehicles off the road. And at the same time, if somebody chooses that they want to live in a setting and rely on their vehicle, that we also have the capacity and the ability to enable that to happen. So everything's a trade-off, and we have to find a balance. But I think the best that we can do moving forward is to make sure we have all of those options available, so we're not forcing everyone into one of those buckets, because that's probably not realistic.
Okay, thank you.
Right. So moving along, zero waste and community cohesion and public health. Councilor, Mayor Pro Tem Johnson, we'll start with you since you were kind of heading that way.
Thank you. Jonathan, I want you to know a lot of the things that you say I believe in and agree with, to provide choices. And I don't mean to sound like a naysayer, but I do have a little bit of a concern, frankly, that we are building a public policy based on one theory. There are other people out there that actually, and I'll say it, look at climate change from a very different perspective. The U.S. has actually met the Kyoto Protocol. That's important to know. The most recent issue of the American Association Petroleum Geologists magazine has in here climate debate, more political than scientific. It says, before there can be meaningful political discussion about the impact of global climate change and the cause of that change, the debate must first be scientifically resolved. There are some folks out there that see this very differently, and I have a little concern about us going in such a strong direction based on one theory. Getting that out of the way. Let me just, a few things here. We talked about, or you talked about, we've met this wonderful percentage based on multimodal transportation. It was only 2 weeks ago when I spoke with Natalie Menton from RTD. The projection for the West Rail before it was built was 20,000 a day ridership. At this point, it's only 11,000. So we do have a ways to go on that. Part of what I'm having angst over in this document is that we as a city are actually pushing behavior change. I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with that role for us, and I just need to get it out there. There's a few things in this document that kind of have gotten my attention. Under energy, water, and the built environment, one of the goals is to ensure affordable energy for Lakewood while transitioning to renewable energy sources. When I read the word ensure, to me that's a mandate. I'm not sure how we're going to go about that. Let me figure out, there's a few other things here I just want to bring forward. And there's
Do you want a response on that, or you just?
No, these are just some things I want to bring out, and then maybe you can respond to them all, because there's a trend here. Under sustainable economy, we've got to ensure self-sufficiency and upward mobility of Lakewood households. How do we as a city do that? Ensure this. That, to me, is another mandate. We've got to increase the number of households above living wage standard by 15% by 2025. As a city, what is our role in this? You'll get the point here in just a minute. Ensure self-sufficiency and upward mobility of Lakewood households. We've got to ensure 60% of households in the CDB qualified neighborhoods spend less than 45% of income on housing and transportation costs. I'm struggling with the role of a city in some of this and why we should be involved in behavior change, frankly. But let me keep going. And then again, under community cohesion and public health, we've got to ensure public equity and strong supportive services.
Referring to the plan.
Under Sustainable Neighborhoods Program, we've got establish a revenue stream to support the program through a fee structure charged to new communities joining the Sustainable Neighborhood Network based on technical support needs and the size of the community. I guess I'm struggling with some of this, Jonathan, and I just need to get it out there. I think you can see where I'm going with this. We've got what to me look like many mandates.
Sure.
And
just to,
I just don't know, as a city, why we're putting ourselves in a role like this. You talk to me. I want to hear your response.
And just for clarity, I think you're looking at the actual sustainability plan, not the annual report, as far as that language, in case people are looking in their annual report and wondering where that language is. So all those ensures are language that are part of the goal statements and the objectives of the plan that were developed by the community through a tremendous amount of outreach. And so while I understand, if I understand you correctly, you're concerned that the use of the word ensure implies that we've created a rule or a policy or some regulatory measure to make that happen. The intent of that language is really speaking to the intent of of what the city should work towards. And so what follows then are all the implementation strategies that are in the plan, which I think if you look at them, are primarily about creating programs that enable people to have opportunities or direct the city to consider all of these issues when we are doing the jobs that we already do. And so I think the ensure language is really a reflection of the values that the community brought to us during the planning process. The Sustainable Neighborhoods example about creating the revenue stream has to do with the fact that we've had a tremendous amount of interest in the Sustainable Neighborhoods programs from jurisdictions outside of the city of Lakewood. And as you may be aware, the city and county of Denver has adopted our program, and we spent a lot of time with them, coaching them and helping them get that off the ground. They now are currently taking on their 10th and 11th neighborhood in the program and have seen a tremendous amount of positive outcomes and benefits, and they value it highly. And we've gotten inquiries from dozens of other cities, not just in Colorado, but actually around the country and even internationally. And so we put that in the plan to say, if we're going to provide our expertise and our experience and our staff time to help those communities, that we should establish some kind of payment structure so that we can recoup those costs and then use it to help us build our program. So it would be a revenue source coming from other cities that want to purchase basically our program.
Okay, please understand, I don't think that I can reasonably go to what the update is without looking at the basic document that all of this is based on. So I'm okay with that.
You also mentioned the energy ensure affordability in the energy system, and I think that was put in so that we made sure that we didn't get so focused on a transition to renewables that we weren't paying attention to maybe the reality of what the cost might be to make that transition. So the language there about ensuring affordability was to make sure that we were equally valuing both, and opportunities for people to access solar and wind power, but also not in a way that would make it so that energy costs, somehow went up because we were pushing that too fast. So that was really about protecting, the residents and the businesses and making sure that we were doing as much work to make sure that our energy prices were affordable as we were to transition to renewable sources.
Okay. You also brought up the survey regarding trash hauling.
Mm-hmm.
There has been some interest that maybe there was this was going to drive public policy regarding a single hauler trash. Could you please speak to that?
Sure. The city of Lakewood cannot take over trash hauling as a municipal utility. That's not a potential option. The city of Lakewood could decide that they want to create rules for how waste haulers operate in the city. The city could decide that the existing system where people hire whoever they want and there's no shift is appropriate. And our job as staff, we really were, we heard from the majority of comments we heard during the planning process for the Zero Waste chapter had to do with people asking us to address issues that they saw with the waste system. And so we're not really sure what all those issues are and how different solutions might be presented. And so the survey is really a tool so that we can, we've hired a company to do a statistically significant survey so that we have the best information possible to bring to you as city council with a suite of options to identify those.
Council, to take that a step further, we will not as staff be bringing you forward one solution. We are going to bring you forward data and, like Jonathan said, a suite of here are things that could be done. Why, all the way from status quo to whatever else, whatever options we find out there that other communities have done. And here is the data for what's being done in Lakewood, what's been done in other communities. So we won't bring you a solution. We will bring you a series of options.
The complexity of the various issues too aren't ones that can even necessarily all be solved with one solution, and so that's part of the reason to do the research. If one of the issues is the number of trash trucks on the street, another is the amount of days that there's trash on the curb, and therefore every time it's windy, trash is blowing all over the street. If another concern is the low rates of recycling or diversion, if another is dealing with yard waste and organics or agricultural waste streams, there's not a silver bullet that's out there. And what we need, the reason we need to collect data is to understand how all these exist, how they interact with each other, and then we can look at all different types of potential solutions and see which ones solve which problems and which ones might create others. And so we're in the process of that.
Thank you. I appreciate that response. Perhaps I'm the only one up here that has not seen the survey. Is it possible to share it with us? I'd love to see what it looks like.
I sent it around to you, and I can certainly send it again.
Yeah, could you please? Thank you.
So I'll just make a quick commentary here on the community cohesion and public health, and I don't expect an answer, but I'd be interested to see the increased recreational program participation. We've actually seen that drop 4%. So that's for a different day, but I'd be curious to maybe understand better those trends, why we're seeing that go down. Is it more competition with private places, or is it cost effectiveness for people to utilize our programs, things like that? Councilor Abel?
Well, that kind of touches on what I want to speak to, and that is I'm glad to see all the recreational components in the steps that we should be taking for community health purposes. And I bet it was difficult to decide whether to put the community garden section in a different part of this report because they go together so well. The encouragement of front yard and backyard farms and public recreation facilities and opportunity, and perhaps that if we provide easier access at less cost to some of our citizens, that 4% drop will be reversed and will lead to a dramatic climb. Thank you.
Councilor Franks?
Just a few points on the, were we talking about 1,350 tons of material recycled at Quail Street? The couple comments I just wanted to make there is, it was much easier when it was single stream. I can tell you that now not being single stream, I luckily can put 5 bins out under a covered area and my husband can diligently sort those. But we've encountered people at that facility who are sorting in the rain and in the snow. And so I think we did the citizens a little bit of a disservice. We're saying how much we want them to recycle, and then changing that from single stream certainly made that a little harder. So that's more of a comment, but I didn't know if there was any plans to change that.
I think that is an important comment, and that's it's a challenge because the cost of operating the site fluctuates with the commodity prices of the recycling. And once again, this isn't an area that my division oversees, but we do work with environmental services quite a bit, so we're fairly familiar with the challenges. By separating the streams, we were able to actually gather some revenue from certain streams to help offset the cost of others compared to when it was all lumped together. And so that was really just a operational efficiency issue. I think that division that runs that is very hard at work looking at potential solutions to find other ways to make sure that it's sustainably funded in ways that we could go back to single stream, because I think we understand that as a service is a preferable model, but preferable to having no recycling is to the sorting, and they do have staff there that is very helpful and will help people sort, so that's kind of a stopgap. I know that's not a perfect solution, but it keeps us operating.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, as I was out campaigning, the whole single trash was a big deal in Ward 4. I'm sure in the other wards as well. And I really heard a lot. People want to retain choice. So I want to kind of echo the let's provide good choices and let people opt in. And I think along that same line, what I'd like to say is I just think there's a real opportunity in the city to do pilot programs in areas without these citywide type initiatives. I think sometimes, we're so anxious to get something going that we're willing to make a lot of mistakes. And I think that in some of these cases, just a pilot program in a community that's really wanting to adopt that would allow us to get a lot of good steam without creating so much havoc in the community. So I'd like us to consider pilot programs.
Councilor Vincent?
I think I'm on chapter 7. Is it okay? Confused.
You're fine.
Okay.
We still do have another presentation.
Okay, and then I'll
You
make
keep going. Ask as many questions as you'd like.
Okay. I don't know if this is a question or a comment. I live in a CDBG targeted area, right in the heart of it. And we talk a lot about multimodal and ways to get people on mass transit and living there. But I guess I'm offering a comment that there's a lot of inputs to that one output. There are things like sidewalks. Right now, I walk every day or days that I take the light rail. There's no sidewalks to walk on. There's no lighting, so people feel unsafe walking to and from the light rail. They just do. Today it was pouring rain, and people were waiting for a bus to try to come down Wadsworth in the rain. There's no parking. There's not shelters. We're not making it easy for people to get to 20,000. I know why they're at 11,000. You miss connections. You don't have that infrastructure that makes people want to, or makes it easy for them to do. So I guess I'm encouraging you, when you look at this, just don't look at getting people to the bus stop. You have to look at all those other things that are the inputs to that to make it easy for people, and that's when they'll do it. They've got to be able to walk, they've got to be able to drive to the places, and they've got to be able to get on and off easily and make connections. So I have very few soapboxes, but boy, is that one of them.
Fully
Well
agree.
said.
Yep.
Anything else? Okay. Councilor Harrison?
Are you ready for wrap-up comments?
Nope. I think we still have some questions. Councilor Shakti?
To follow up on the little bit of trash conversation, I think what I would say is that we're just starting the trash conversation. I look forward to having a lot of data and a lot of options, and the what's important to me is what services my constituents get at what price, what's a good deal, kind of thing. And then my question is, am I reading it right that we have 6 food deserts?
Can you give me the page?
34.
That looks to be the case, yes. 6 as defined by the USDA. Yep.
That's a lot.
It is. We can work that's definitely one of those goals we can address and we can be successful in eliminating. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Jonathan, to eliminate that, does that have to be a retail store that needs to be in those areas that sells produce? Or so does the Mount Air Farm, does that count towards the alleviation of it? Yeah.
You have to come up to this.
So it's not necessarily a brick and mortar grocery store. It could be other means. Okay.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Lynn Copper, Sustainability Planner. And the USDA defines the food deserts by income and, apologies for that. Lynn Coppage on the record. The USDA defines food deserts based on access and proximity, so or cost and access. So community gardens and all sorts of kind of food outlets would count for that. So yes.
Thank you. All right, any other questions? Seeing none, comments. I know, Councilor Harrison, you must have a comment.
Yes. I have a Ward 5 brag. Did you notice that there are count 'em, two sustainable networks, or sustainable neighborhoods in Ward 5? We have Southern Gables and Lake Lockwood. I just want to point that out, that we are a sustainable ward. And I also wanted to find out if the Action Center and their food bank, would that be considered when you're looking at food banks and food deserts?
I'm seeing a yes.
They're saying a yes. Thank
I
you.
believe it like yes.
So I just had to brag. Thanks.
Fantastic. Councilor Abel?
Ward 1 is home to a large part of the neighborhood and most of the south of 6th Sustainable neighborhood, which is the largest sustainability neighborhood in all of Lakewood. Thank you.
And looks like Councilor Roybal wants to get on this.
I'm going to jump in the bandwagon. As far as food banks, Ward 3, we lay claim to have one of the biggest in the city of Lakewood. And matter of fact, it is going to be tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock at Phillips United Methodist Church, just north of Florida on Pierce. That's what I got.
Right. Jonathan and company, Travis, thank you very much. We look forward to continuing to hear about the progress as things move forward. Appreciate your time this evening. So now we will move on to item number 4. This is a continued discussion on Taxpayer Bill of Rights. This originally came up at our retreat in January. We had one study session, and from that study session, we came out with kind of 3 areas where folks wanted to have a conversation. One was not going forward with anything. Councilor Wickman suggested maybe a hybrid model with a elimination of a ratchet effect. And the third would be to go to the voters for a de-Bruce. So we have our Finance Director, Larry Dorr, here to give us some more information, and another guest who will be with us as well. Councilor Wickman, is this a comment prior, or did you?
Well, it occurred to me, we've spent an awful lot of time the last few months talking about how we decide what our agenda items are. And it occurred to me, at a last meeting, we said we're going to be filling out a form, and in July we'll be voting and stuff like that. So my question is, how did this get on the agenda? I didn't vote to put this on the agenda. So who put this on the agenda tonight?
So again, that was the quick history that I gave at our retreat. We had consensus from all of us, including yourself, that council wanted to discuss this, and we had a study session, and at that study session, we decided that we would have a follow-up conversation tonight.
Well, we also had some consensus that I brought up the issue about, and this is a classic example, at the study session tonight, we should be hearing both sides instead of just one side. And one of the things I brought up is we should have some sort of mechanism where we can have citizens or other experts or whatever, other side input tonight. And this would have been a classic example. I think there are people who are interested in having an input, and they're not. And so again, my question is, how come that's not on the agenda, But this is on the agenda. We discuss a lot of things at the retreat, and the things that somehow rise to the top, it's kind of beyond me as to how these things get in and other things get left out.
Okay, thank you, sir. Larry, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of City Council. Once again, Larry Dorr, City of Lakewood Finance Director and City Treasurer. Well, in February, as mentioned at Council's planning session, there was an interest on the part of Council to better understand and undertake due diligence and just gather facts and information. That's prudent, and also with new elected officials to orient themselves to how the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights impacts the City of Lakewood. And the numbers have gotten pretty large financially in terms of dollars and cents. And in April, the Council's Budget and Audit Committee, which consists of Council members Gutwein, Franks, and Koop, and 3 citizens, learned about the latest trend and how the city is impacted by Tabor. And it was also their suggestion that Council continue to move forward and understand the facts, background, and information. And so tonight, I'm following up on the May 16th study session. There were some questions and some asks for information, and I want to provide those to you here tonight. There was also, Councilman Dave Wickman had some questions that were of a legal nature, and I'm not qualified to answer those, so I've invited a special counsel to the city attorney's office to address those for the council member. But before I do that, I want to just touch on a few matters related to Tabor that have already been presented. In the event that there are those in the audience or watching online that may not have seen those earlier conversations that were happening. So first, I just want to address what is Tabor, and I'll do these very quickly, Mayor and Council. I know you've seen these, but the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, or as commonly referred to, Tabor, is a section of the Colorado Constitution, was voted in 1992. It's almost as important to mention what Tabor is not, and oftentimes that's confused by the former Lieutenant Governor of the state of Colorado from the 1890s, Mr. Horace Tabor. This has nothing to do with that or the Tabor Opera House in Leadville or any of those street signs you may see around the region, but rather Tabor does a number of things related to government finance, and that's at the state, county, city, municipal levels of government, and does a number of things, requires an election for a tax increase, issuance of bonds, a number of things, but this is impacting the city's financial statements and balance sheets due to the revenue limit component of the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, and that is that city revenues are limited to the Consumer Price Index plus local growth as defined under Tabor, which is essentially a change in the city's assessed valuation from year to year due to new construction or annexation. Since 1992, Lakewood voters have addressed the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights on its ballot. Dating back to 1996, the city did a rather unique exemption, and that was to allow for an annexation that exempted all revenues from that area. In 1999, the city voters elected to have an 8-year timeout from Tabor, and then in 2005, the city's tax increase was also exempt, and then in 2007, some special revenues, certain grants and open space income to the city were exempted. So a few things have been approved and attempted relative to how Tabor impacts the city's finances. And then most recently, as I've been talking about earlier, have been presented to Budget and Audit Committee and all of the members of council and the community, refunds that have exceeded the limits allowed under Tabor. And here are some of those statistics by year. And those have led to tax cuts. I should say that the 2015 has yet to be approved by City Council, and that will be done later in the year during the council's budget process. So yet the 2013 and 2014 have already been processed and have been taken care of. So now I'll move ahead to the list of follow-ups, and there were quite a number, but let me go ahead and jump in. And the first was related to the city's reserves, and I went ahead and took a look at the statistics. These are in alphabetical order, and I've got them presented more than just one way, so I'll draw your attention to this. And I should say that all of the governments on here, none of them, rather, have released their 2015 financial statistics. Everybody's got all of those in process, and our committee just saw our auditors in the office last month, and all of those preparations are underway. But these are all the 2014 statistics, and of course, even our city council has approved just last month a use of reserves that will change the numbers a little bit. But these are all on an apples-to-apples basis. And, you know, I tried to pick a sample of the largest cities in the state of Colorado, and I tried to also include those very close to Lakewood in Jefferson County. And then I decided to include the county as well, figuring more information would be better. And it's presented here in months because I know that that's often of interest, and that gives credit to that old adage of X amount of months of savings should be in the bank, depending on the business, the household, the government, whatever it might be. And that's in relative terms that many people are familiar with. And of course, I'll show you these in a percentage basis as well. And, you know, obviously, the city and county of Denver, their reserves is in the multi-hundreds of millions, but obviously the population is quite larger and operating activities are quite different. However, this puts all of those agencies all the way down to a community the size of Golden on a similar apples-to-apples type comparison. And then I just took the same statistics, which is the reserves, and, you know, put that into the formula, and then of course got the percent. And you'll see that on either basis, Lakewood is right on the average. And I was famously quoted for a number of years as saying, in my professional opinion, the reserve is not too big, not too small, but perhaps just right. And it's interesting how the city of Lakewood just falls sort of right in the middle there in terms of the overall size. So I felt that would be useful, but do keep in mind that obviously the numbers will change. And in addition to the use of reserves that were just approved, the related litigation and other activities will require replenishment of risk management reserves from the general fund as well. But we'll go into a lot more detail of that later on in the budget process. Of course, we'll look at all of that, but we needed to have the latest appropriation complete. And then related to reserve spending overall, there were some questions of, Larry, can you go back over the last 4 years and let us know what's been done from reserves and give us a little feel for some of the larger numbers and what's gone on there. And I've got a nice listing here, and I should note that this says Carmody Center roof, and that's really over the swimming pool facility. There are a couple of rooftops there at the facility. Also, council appropriated in its budget $1 million to replace 5 playgrounds, so that gives you an idea of the scope of that. We have over 70 playgrounds across the community, so that gives you a little flavor for that. And then I'll talk a little bit about sidewalks here in a minute, but council appropriated a supplement to that $2 million. Slash facility, monies were appropriated there, street medians. Some years ago, and we're very close to the initial launch of the police record system, which is a regional record system. That's very exciting. Safety center concrete repairs, and you'll see those improvements to the police station, as we call it, here later this year. Of course, Civic Center Plaza, that's gotten completed. And then, as was mentioned in the sustainability overview just a moment ago, these pedestrian improvements related to light rail, $2,788,000, and that was to try to do some of those features. And it's just, the list is significant, but that certainly made an impact. And that's $14,638,000 that otherwise would be in reserve. So that gives you an idea over the last 4 years, sort of what that looks like. So next for me to follow up was asked, quite honestly, a difficult task of a few council members was, we want to have an idea of the needs across the community. What do those look like? And I want to just say that I've done this on an overview basis because this alone would probably be a study session unto itself with ranges of estimated costs and things like that. But I think what I'll do is give a little flavor in the presentation as to sort of what's out there, and that'll hopefully stimulate some discussion, and of course we can follow up on any details if needed. But there won't be anything on this topic that will be new, and you can sort of see the high level here on this summary slide, but I'll go into just a few more items of detail. First, related to our police department, I've categorized this in two areas. First is technology and equipment, and our police agents are not using smartphones yet, and other communities are. We would have a need to outfit nearly 260 police officers with that technology, and our cost on an annual basis is probably $100,000 to $115,000 a year to operate those phones. As you know, just like in your personal use or businesses, the phone is very inexpensive, of course, but the plan is where the cost comes in. So this would be an ongoing cost. And then in our police department, our police car, patrol car units, we have mobile data computers. And these are the units in the squad car that if you've done a ride-along, you see oftentimes the reports being written or the incoming call is presented to the police agent. It looks and feels a little bit like a laptop. It isn't actually, but that's probably the next trend. And we have 80 units out there in the patrol cars, and those are about $750,000 to replace, just to kind of give you a ballpark of that. And they're probably, they are 7 years old, according to my notes. And then lastly, related to police staffing, you recall that Chief Kevin Paletta presented a study performed by the International Association of the Chiefs of Police, and it had a recommendation to add police staffing, and City Council authorized that. Some agents added 8 agents and 2 community service officers in 2015, last year's budget process for 2016, and you'll see a request for that again in the coming budget. Next, in the area of public works, I've titled this Next Generation Traffic Management, and that's probably a lofty description, and I've listed some potential projects. But before I kind of get into those, we should think about how the city really partners with others, like developers, like Colorado Department of Transportation and others, to complete road projects. And oftentimes the city is making a matching contribution. There are examples of that down at 285 in Wadsworth, many of the bridge overpasses in the community, certainly the widening of Colfax and Wadsworth intersection, if you recall that. And so the city partners with those agencies on all of those projects that reach a scale that are in the multi-millions. One example that is fairly recent and might be vivid is at the Alameda and C470 interchange. There was no access to C470 from Alameda prior to that bridge being built some years ago, and the city, along with the landowners nearby and the county, contributed toward the construction of that. So while that whole interchange was well over 8 figures, over $10 million, the city's contribution, I think in that instance, was $3.5 million. So as I talk about Wadsworth and 6th Avenue, the Route Street Bridge, 6th Avenue pedestrian, and these others, I'll share some broad ranges, but of course the city wouldn't be contributing the full cost and honestly wouldn't have the resources necessarily. So at Wadsworth and 6th Avenue, it's a visible intersection in the community that's quite busy. It has this cloverleaf design, and replacing that would cost between $70 and $80 million. The Route Street Bridge, which has been discussed by council before, is probably $10 million in cost. This 6th Avenue pedestrian bridge at Red Rocks Community College initially was a part of the RTD project, but became infeasible through its value reengineering, is probably $3.5 to $4.5 million, somewhere in that neighborhood. And Kipling Parkway lane additions would be up over $10 million to make additions there. We also have some needs across the community related to traffic signals, and most of those signals that you would see would cost over $1 million a piece to accomplish. So I know that's at a very high level. I know those were broad ranges, but hopefully that gives you a little flavor for some of the needs that are out there. Let's see. And then in the area of community resources, I want to give you a little flavor for some of the things happening happening there and some of the ranges of cost. First, the city has a trail assessment that is underway, and we have a need to make paved trail connections, and we think that that cost might be somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 to $6 million. We also need to repair some of our existing concrete paths. We think that we have a log there of between $2 and $3 million. And then park implementations. One of the most recent and vivid park plan implementations was at Ray Ross, and the park was basically transformed in whole, if you're familiar with Ray Ross Park. And so if you can overlay that to other parks across the community, for example, Carmody Park plan implementation might be in the $7 million and over range. Lasley Park over $1 million, and others like Whitlock and so forth could come together and exceed $10 million for those park plan implementation. Bicycle master plan, I know that that was brought up earlier in our sustainability plan, but I think it was reported that something like 7% or whatnot of the potential build out is complete, and those are in the multi-millions, over $20 to $30 million perhaps to replace some of those. And then lastly, I mentioned the playground replacements, but facility renovations, and we continue to do those. I mentioned the police station and Carmody and so forth. We do have a number of needs in that area, so that's something for your additional consideration. I know that was at a high level and didn't go necessarily into a great amount of depth in terms of what those features might be in those various parks or what the road construction choices might be, but it gives you a little flavor relative to the overall reserves and surpluses that are available to the city. So that wraps up my comments, but before I welcome questions, Mayor, from you and Council, I want to introduce Mr. Dee Weiser, who will come to the podium for some comments and some feedback. As mentioned, Councilman Dave Wickman asked a question or two regarding elimination of the ratchet effect that Tabor presents. Also has mentioned the idea of removing limits from certain sources of revenue, like police extra duty activities, things of that nature, certain grants and so forth. And I deferred to the city attorney's office to try to answer those questions, and they've invited Special Counsel Dee Weiser to do that. He's a partner in the law firm of Butler and Snow and is a expert on the legalities of Tabor dating back to the creation of Tabor in the early 90s. So, Mr. Weiser, please come forward, and if you would talk on those matters for the council, I'll be right back up.
Good evening, sir. Thank you for coming out tonight.
Mayor, members of council, my name again is Dee Weiser. I've been practicing law in Colorado now 40 years this year. And in a way, I got my start at the city of Lakewood because when I was at DU Law School, I was a law clerk in the city attorney's office, and I've been advising local governments and state agencies ever since. So thank you for that beginning. I do an awful lot of work in the Tabor area. Almost a day does not pass when I haven't counseled some client about Tabor compliance issues. It's just hard to be in this practice given Tabor's broad impacts on state and local governments. A lot of the work I do is about helping governments craft and submit to their voters ballot questions, because really what Tabor's all about is giving to the voters the chance to make various financial decisions, debt, tax increases, and revenue increases as well. If the goal of the council is to keep the tax dollars that have been collected rather than to have to refund them to the voters as Tabor requires, then of course you can do that at any November election, and there's no magic form to what that question looks like. You have a lot of opportunity. There are some Tabor questions, like in a tax increase or a debt increase, where Tabor mandates the form of the question, but in the context of keeping excess revenues, you really have a lot of freedom to decide how you would like to pursue that. If your goal is to avoid the ratchet effect forevermore, then the thing to do would be to ask the voters a pretty broad question that would be something like, without increasing taxes, shall the city be authorized to keep the revenues that it collects from existing tax rates? And then from that point, you can make other choices. One of your choices might be to say that that only lasts for a period of time, a sunset provision. And maybe it's 5 years or 10 years, whatever you pick. And of course, at the end of that period of time, whoever's sitting at the council at that time would have to make a choice about whether to go back or to live with the Tabor constraints from that point forward. A variation on that theme, which the state of Colorado pursued in 2005 in Referendum C, was to have a 5-year sunset, but then in that sunset to adjust the base from the termination of the sunset to help eliminate the ratchet effect. Now, in truth, Colorado is getting close to the point where Tabor refunds may begin again. Some of this will depend upon things that go on at the General Assembly about the hospital provider fee that you've probably read about in the paper. But that would certainly be, those would be the kinds of choices you would make in crafting a question. Another approach you might take is to only exempt certain revenue streams, and in fact, you've done that a little bit in your past. And so Larry and Tim talked to me about, for example, recreation revenues, police extra duty revenues, grants from local government sources, interest income, sponsorship revenue. You could exclude those revenue streams in a question you submit to your voters. A challenge that may present, though, is that in the calculation of the revenue limit going forward, you're now multiplying the inflation and local growth factor on a smaller number of revenues. So less increase on that, whatever remains subject to Tabor's revenue limitations. So maybe, Mayor, I should stop there and, as with Larry, offer to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. And if you want to grab a seat back there, you're more than welcome to. Larry, are you going to come back up and chat a little bit more?
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. I don't have any more background, facts, or information to deliver. Again, we've followed up on first some details of the reserves, some needs or uses across the community as asked by council, and then also the legal questions. And as you heard, those choices offered would be legal under Tabor. And so thank you, and hopefully this gives enough information for your discussion. Thank you.
I really appreciate it, and we had great discussion last study session. I look forward to that now. The couple things to get us started. I'd like to see some potential follow-up questions, especially from Councilmember Wickman, about kind of that Ref C and get a better idea of what you had thought with that or where we were going. I would also ask the city manager, we heard a little bit about some of the needs of the city, but it's important we hear potentially needs from the community. And so I want to look at seeing if we could have another study session, if there's something out in the future down the road, if we decide to go that route, to have more of a conversation to allow for some public comment at some upcoming meetings. But it'd be really nice to hear from the community and see what they're thinking as well. So just a couple of things there.
Okay, thank you. So are you...
I'm just throwing that out there. If you want to, while we're asking questions, take a look and see what makes sense, where that would happen, let us know.
Absolutely.
All right, Councilor Franks.
Well, mainly just a couple of comments. I'm getting feedback from the community. Some people are for, putting something on the ballot so they can choose. Other people who feel that, we should just follow the law. And really a couple comments I just really wanted to pass on, because I think it's important that we kind of respect the divergence of opinions, is that we have a number of citizens who are concerned that if we put something like this on the ballot, and the money is put for a targeted use, that just frees up that general funding for other purposes that some citizens believe is inappropriate. So I just like to call attention to that we still have folks who are giving, at least Councilor Wickman and I, a lot of feedback about the charitable giving program. Again, about art space and the potential for the land to be sold at a price that's maybe below market rate. And so I just want us to be really kind of cognizant that no matter how we move forward with this, whether we provide direction to put something together that gets on the ballot or not, that does not really mean that we're in agreement about how that would move forward or what those statements are. So those were more just comments, and really did want to understand, are we looking as a city to target where these monies that we won't distribute back, are we looking to set aside those for specific purposes based on what we saw here? And then how does that affect the other monies that could get spent in a broader range of ways? I'd kind of like a little background on that.
Thank you, Councilmember Franks. I could see you addressing the comment and question to me, but Mayor, that's really for the council to discuss, decide, and direct staff on which direction to go. And of course, all money spent by the city would be within the council's approved budget.
Sure. Well, and I guess why I looked at you is to that point, if this were to go forward and there was a question asked, where do you want these monies to go? You could separate out where those monies went, and that could be in addition to the general fund. So like Councilor Franks is saying, you're not just alleviating money here, you're continuing that program, your general fund, your capital improvement, but extra monies would be dedicated to whatever council would decide based on what the community's needs are.
Yes, thank you. I beg your pardon. That is a technical question, and yes, that is an option for you. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Councilor Coop?
I guess I just want to clarify that if something was brought to the voters for these departments that were mentioned, and then a few years down the road, we thought, okay, they've got everything they need. This money needs to go somewhere else. That would mean going back to the voters.
Councilman, that's correct. If you had a very narrow list of uses in the question you submitted to your voters and those uses no longer were relevant, or you felt the needs had been met and there was some other priority, then you would have to go back to your voters to ask for permission to spend it in some other way.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Abel?
A few things. You gave us numbers about the 6th Avenue Wadsworth Bridge, the Kipling widening, that sort of thing. The numbers you gave us, were those total cost or Lakewood's cost?
Those were the total costs.
Okay, so Lakewood's cost would be significantly lower than those figures you gave us.
It would be lower indeed.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
It would be lower.
Thank you. Just to be clear, if we were to give this money back to the taxpayers, would it mean that we would no longer be building playgrounds, hiring police, providing sidewalks and public trails? Because I remember 10 years ago or so, there was a tax increase before council, and we were told that without it, we would be turning off the street lights and risking public safety. So I just want to make sure that we're not engaging in that same kind of conversation. I like the mayor's idea about getting community comments on this. It's their money, and I'd like to hear the opinions. What I've heard from Ward 1, just anecdotally, is that people would like to get a check. And to that point, if we cut checks and people don't want to give the money back, do they have to cash them, Mr. Dorr?
Let's see. If we issue a check that's not cashed, then no, then the money wouldn't be used. Obviously, it would.
Well, the money wouldn't be going back to the citizen. It would remain with the city. Is that right?
Correct.
Thank you.
But I do think it's the rare circumstance where a government cashes a check. I was an elected official when Tabor passed, and I thought, well, at least I could go around and hand out checks when we had to do a refund, and that would help my reelection campaign. But nobody actually does it that way. Usually it's done by some tax credit mechanism where they don't actually see a check, and so it comes to them automatically.
In the first place, I'm not running for re-election and haven't even contemplated the concept. Secondly, we do give checks. We send out, well, it's refund on, last time it was refund on the stormwater bill.
And property.
All right. So can people refuse to take that, or?
Well, sure, they could, yes. So at the same time, though, the city needs to refund taxes that are due to the taxpayers. You know, if they're uncashed checks or whatnot, we would then need to find some other way to share or reduce taxes, as mentioned, and of course that would be administratively expensive and so forth. I'm not sure that'd be a good recommendation.
That comes back to a question of equity that I believe Ms. Franks raised last study session on Tabor. Is there a more equitable way to distribute Tabor refunds? Since, as we mentioned, property tax is 7% of our revenue, and sales tax is 72% of the revenue. And while I realize that property owners do pay sales tax, there's a large gap out there. A person who's been in an elected position with the school suggested the other day that it might take the form of a tax holiday. Would that be possible? Or would that be too hard to hit the right mark with?
It'd be difficult to know how much was refunded through tax holiday and so forth, so I'm not familiar I don't know that a refund via that method has ever been done. The most precise way and I believe the most administratively efficient and the most equitable way is through the property tax rebate.
Okay. Thank you.
Larry, for clarification, we've refunded twice through the stormwater and once through property tax?
Correct.
Of recent years? Okay. Councilor Shakti?
Could you, I realize they're like big picture and they're not, but could you send us an email with all of those big picture costs?
We could do that.
And then I think it's a good point Councilor Abel made that a lot of those things will get some money from other entities. It's also a notable trend that the local jurisdictions are carrying more of the cost of these big infrastructure projects than they used to. I didn't see sidewalks in that list. Was it in that list? Okay, I spaced out for a second. And I guess I would add to I think it's a great idea to have a meeting with opportunity for more public input and to do sort of to have time for us to be talking to our constituents. I've gotten 2 emails. One says put it on the ballot, one said don't. And this morning I had a ward meeting and we talked about it, and the general sentiment was that people thought it was a good idea to invest the money in the community. And then I tried to push, okay, what on what? You know, like and the one that came up the strongest was definitely sidewalks, and then open space, and the landscaping around sidewalks. So I might be missing something from that, but I think it's an interesting conversation in general about what are, I mean, it's sort of like the comp plan conversation, what are our priorities in the community, and then the second is this money part of what we want to do with those priorities? Another question, in terms of the referendum C type ballot question, I guess one question is it like comprehensible at all if you put that on? And then the second is, could it be done retroactively so that we put ourselves in a position we would be in if there hadn't been a ratcheting down effect?
There are two good questions there. Whether these are comprehensible or not, I've thought for a while that my high school English teacher would be extremely disappointed in the ballot questions I draft. But we have to say a lot in a little. And so you could go back and look at the Ref C question, but it's complicated because it sort of refers to a statutory definition, which may not have led to very good understanding about what happens at the end of the sunset. But I think to answer your second question, I do think it would be possible to submit a question that says, basically, we'd like to adjust our base by whatever the highest dollar amount was we collected in the last 5 years, adjusted for inflation and local growth going forward. So that's on top of your Tabor revenue limits. I think it would be possible to do that. I've not seen one done quite that way. More normally, it's the Ref C approach where can we get a timeout from Tabor and then look at the highest collection point during that timeout and adjust it for inflation and local growth going forward. But there's no reason why you couldn't do it looking just backwards.
So if you went down that road and say you were looking to do a timeout, and then you're also looking to, well, I guess if you did the timeout, you would exempt those other funds that we were talking about, police overtime, things like that. So it would all fit under that. I guess my question was, because of the language in a title, you can't have multiple questions asked in one question, correct?
Actually, there's not a single subject rule that applies to local governments, and so you can do some more consolidation. You don't have to worry about those issues, but all of these things kind of fit under the broad rubric of a voter-approved revenue change, which is what Tabor contemplates, really.
Thank you.
So could you, in one question, look forward and back in terms of the ratcheting effect? So make it so that we are not ratcheted down from the previous recession and have a timeout going into the future?
I think inherently, if we ask the question that said, can the city keep and spend all the money it's collecting from existing tax rates for the next 5 years, that basically takes care of your past, I think, and then adjust the base from the end of the 5-year period going forward. I might have to consult with Larry a little bit about the exact numbers, but I think there's a way that doing it accomplishes your goal.
So like referendum C, if you do something so that you don't have the ratcheting down effect, it seems to me like you can still have limits on revenue growth, but I guess I might, I'm a little bit confused because Tabor's a little bit confusing. We can still limit growth. So if we assume that there's a trajectory line of growth, but then so that we don't end up spending a whole lot more even if the city gets a lot more money, but we're limiting it so that if there's a recession we don't have the ratcheting down effect. Can we do that without a time limit so that we're not debrucing, we're still limited by the amount we can spend, but we're not going to have a ratchet down effect ever into the future? Can we do that?
I don't think there's a way to do something that avoids a ratchet down effect forever without simply doing a broad debrucing question that says, can we keep and spend all the revenue we get from existing tax rates? In fact, referendum C did not eliminate ratchet effect for the state of Colorado. All it did was say for the period from 2005 to 2010, there were no limits that the state had to comply with. And then from 2010 going forward, they picked the highest year, which I think was 2010, and adjusted that, no, it was 2008, adjusted that for inflation and local growth going forward. And that has given the state flexibility until now, when they're about to bump up against the cap, and we'll have to start refunds again. And if there were to be another economic downturn in the future, they would again likely be confronted with some ratchet impact.
And could, instead of saying the city can keep all the revenue it has now, could we say, because part of the ballot question is not just accomplishing the objective, but explaining the rationale. And so if, in looking at the retrospective ratcheting question, could we phrase it in a way to explain the rationale that the city of Lakewood can keep money from this date, assuming a 2% increase in growth from that date, without the ratcheting down effect that was caused by the recession during these dates? Could it be something like that?
Could be something like that.
Okay. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Larry, for the nice presentation. I, too, very strongly believe that we need to get some more just public input, not more, but just public input, period. I recall when we had our retreat and we talked about Tabor, it seemed to me, and I know I'll get corrected if I'm incorrect, that we have many new members on council that wanted to have a better understanding of what Tabor was about, which was fair. And somehow, my observation is this has morphed into not just education for our new members, but to a debrucing question and putting something on the ballot. That's kind of interesting to me that we've changed what we actually had talked about in the retreat. I've been noticing on Alameda there's quite a bit of activity on the north side there by the Federal Center west of the, and actually I think by the post office. Larry, could you please talk to me about the Route Street Bridge? Whenever I think of that, I think of it in terms of the federal build-out that was proposed, which is now off the table. I'm surprised that it's one of our priorities to go forward with that since the federal center's off the table. Please talk to me about that.
I don't believe it's at all an immediate priority of the community, but I know it was a recent topic. And of course, congestion on Union Boulevard remains interesting to the community and growth of traffic there. So I don't believe it is an immediate priority, but it's fairly recent for the council and community in terms of need overall. And at some point or another, more development may occur, and when it does, that will become more visible again. And because of its recent history and the large cost, it was something to discuss in terms of the overall needs of the community. But I don't think it's a very, very near-term priority, but it seems as though in the future it will be a need and it will be a costly one.
Is there any kind of an update regarding the federal land? Do we know of anything that's out there as far as build out?
I can address that. So last we spoke, the GSA had intended to submit an RFP for the property, and that was to happen back in February, and that has not taken place. It's GSA's property, and it's up to them to decide what to do with it. But there is not an update in terms of their disposition of that property. We are not in conversations with GSA as we've talked over the last several months here with council.
Thank you.
So, yes.
I'm going to follow up to that question about the bridge. And I guess, Larry, you're probably not my guy, but you might know enough. I do believe it's also in the Union connectivity, that whole plan to complete the different road connections in that area to help alleviate traffic on Union to create the new north-south. So I think it is part of other plans other than just the Federal Center plan. Yeah, okay, thank you. Councilor Harrison.
We talked about, and I'm not sure if this would be for Mr. Weiser or from Mr. Dorr, we talked about sunsetting language that we had in previous, we had that 5-year no tax. What was the language in that said during that 5-year, 8-year, where we
It was
didn't-
an 8-year.
Okay,
Yeah,
8-year. How did we do that? Because one of the questions was how do you do it and then start it again?
Thank you. Yes, that was voted on in 1999, and it's natural that as you talk about Tabor, we want to present the history in Lakewood, and that involves voting and things like that. It's just part of the landscape. But it is an additional line or two in the ballot question that says it effectively takes the question of a complete debrucing and adds language that says for 1999 in that case, and the subsequent 7 years shall the city be exempt from those revenue limitations. It's really just a one-liner, frankly.
Okay, so using that, when we started again at the end of 8 years, what did we start from in the ratchet effect at that point?
Yeah, effectively the other language, the second line in the two-liner is upon sunset, shall the base of revenues be reset to the then current year. And effectively, that's what was done in the city of Lakewood. It could be, I hadn't heard what Mr. Weiser was proposing, that it could also be it could be the highest year during the 8 years. In 1999 was just voted to be the then 2007 revenues.
So
8
effectively,
years
we
later.
could establish whatever year we wanted to use as ratchet if we would choose to go that way, and if the voters supported that, correct?
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay. And then are there other municipalities close by that have chosen holidays, 8-year holidays, or was this kind of unique to Lakewood? Is this common?
I can't think offhand of somebody nearby that has that. I think in the early years, a few people voted, as Larry said, a temporary timeout. Really, frankly, in a lot of communities now, the more common approach has been a permanent, can we keep the revenue we collect from our existing tax sources without having to come back and ask that question again? That's the more prevalent form of question that neighboring communities use.
And if they ask that question, do they also use line items where the money will go, or do they just say, we're going to keep it, we get to spend it?
It varies, but oftentimes there's a list of things, a list of priorities that the council submits to the voters. But even that list isn't necessarily very exclusive. Again, it depends upon the community.
Mayor Paul, I would really like to have another session as well. So thank you.
Councilor Wickman.
I'm going to start off with saying I kind of regret my original comments about raising the whole ratchet thing. I'm afraid it's kind of evolved into a can of worms, and I don't want to do anything that would deprive the people of their refund. So I kind of want to withdraw myself from that whole concept of changing the ratchet. Now, in the idea of the lateness of the hour, I want to hurry up and get out of here, is for the next study session, I would like to make three requests. Number one, let's have time to solicit the citizens. They don't actually, get out in 24 hours and get to us. It takes time to hear from the citizens, and of course, now it's summertime. So I'd like to say that this study session not be in 2 weeks, but maybe 4 weeks or beyond. Sufficient time to actually get some input. Secondly, going back to my other point, when it comes time to debate this, I would like to open this up to have the public. There are experts on the opposite side of Tabor that I would like to see come in here. I'd like to hear some citizens come in. So I'd like to open up the testifying section of the study session to the citizens as well as staff. And then finally, Charlie brought up the point about in 2005, when we voted for the sales tax increase, we put in the language that 50% of the increase would be for roads, public safety, and parks and recreation. So what I would like to see in the next study session, that we spell out how that's been done, how that's been accounted for, how we accomplish that goal. So if we made a promise, I want to be able to put back, how do we fulfill our promise? Because right now, I don't know if we did or not. So anyway, those are 3 things I asked for in our next study session. Thank you.
Mayor, one thing to keep in mind in terms of timing is if you intend to have an election in November, September 9th is the last day to certify a ballot question to the clerk to participate in the coordinated election. And as to the councilor's point about transparency and understanding where money has gone, at least what the state did in Referendum C is they require an annual report which is posted on the state's website to show where those monies have been spent.
Thank you. Councilor Koop.
I look forward to the next study session as well. I think this is important enough, and the idea that we do need to hear from the citizens. Again, I welcome that. I do have a question, though. If something like this does go forward, if we choose to put something on the ballot and the citizens do vote in favor of it, in these 3 departments, the police, the parks, the potholes, the big 3, this isn't a lot of money for those 3 departments. Is there any thought been given as to how this money in 1 year would be divvied up?
Certainly, the staff could present options to the mayor and council in its budget process for how that might work out, but ultimately that would need to be reviewed and authorized by the city council.
So one option, let me just see if I got that clear. One possible option to us would be that, okay, this year there would have been a X amount of refund. In those 3 departments, where does that money go? And that would be for us to decide. Mm-hmm. Very good, thank you.
All right, Ms. Hodson, what did you find on the calendar?
Okay, thank you. So today is June 6th, and understanding and hearing the need to have as much public conversation as possible. We have a study session scheduled for July 18th, and today's June 6th. Was that about 5 weeks? We have a couple other items on there, and we can look at what that means in terms of timeframes. But if that's an idea, we can do it July 18th. That way, like I said, that gives us 5 weeks to listen to the community. In the meantime, there are a couple of regular meetings in there that always have public comment. And as Mr. Weiser said, the ballot wouldn't need to be certified until early September. So we could find another study session if you want another conversation, another opportunity to discuss. So my recommendation on first blush is July 18th. That's 5 weeks out, I think. Does that sound right? 5, or is that 6?
July 18th, we'll do that.
Is that 6?
And so that will allow for public comment at the June 13th meeting. And the June 27th is canceled, right?
That's the Art Space Tour. But also July 11th is a regular meeting as well.
July 11th, so that'll be 2 public comment periods. And also, we will be having a conversation about one of Councilmember Wickman's proposals on the 11th to address what he had mentioned about comment and things like that. So sure. Depending upon how that goes, we might have a whole new way to do things on July 18th.
And I just counted, that's actually 6 weeks from now.
Is everybody in agreement with that? As close as we can get? Okay, all right, good deal. Mr. Weiser, thanks for hanging out with us tonight. We appreciate it. We appreciate it's a complicated subject. Mr. Dorr, thank you very much. Always appreciative. So, reports. I'm going to start with Councilor Franks. I'm just going to go left to right. Or do you want me to skip you? Councilmember Wickman, are you ready on the right? We'll start right to left. All right.
Yeah, I'm not ready, but right off the top of my head, of course, we do have our Ward 4 Town Hall meeting on this Saturday, and it's going to be a good one. They're always good. But this one is going to involve, we're going to be looking at the county's rezoning of the property there at the intersection of C-470 and Alameda. So we will have Greg Stevenson, the developer, is going to come in for, I think, half an hour, and then he'll speak on behalf of it. And then we'll have another speaker speaking against it. Maybe it's 45 minutes. Anyway, we're going to have equal time for the two of them, and of course open it up after that. So if you're interested in that subject matter, you definitely want to come this Saturday, 9:30 at Green Mountain Presbyterian Church there at Alameda, Mississippi.
Thank you. Councilor Vincent.
Just a couple of things. If you've had a chance, I subscribe to 5280, and they had a wonderful article in there about 40 West as one of the top 10 art things in the state. And they talked about all the things that were happening at JCRS and Lamar Station Plaza. And Casa Bonita was mentioned in Lakewood, which is interesting because in the April 5280, it was in Denver. So I don't know when it moved, but it's back in Lakewood. Yeah. We had the first Friday, 40 West Arts. It was a wonderful, wonderful event. Lots of people came out. In the Denver Post last Sunday, there was also a very good article, and it's going to be dedicated, I think, on next Friday, on the Estes Motel and all the different things that happened with that. So that was great. The Ward 2 meeting is at 7:30 a.m. at 1560 Teller. So I'm going to get that address right. Yeah. And just real quickly, we had a historical tour of Ward 2 with the ACIC, and that was wonderful. But we found a lot more things that we want to talk about. People were going, well, what's there? What's there? And so we have to add a lot more next time. And the Montessori School welcome is coming, and it's just a wonderful facility. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Councilor Roybal.
Boy, that was a lot. I'm going to make mine short and sweet. Just a quick reminder, on the 18th of this month in June, we're going to be having a community picnic at Lasley Park. And the topic of Lasley Park is the park itself. The renovation, talk about it, walk around, take a look at it. But come join us for hamburgers and hot dogs. And Shakti and I would like to invite you both, or everybody. Thank you. It's a long night.
Councilor Harris.
I wanted to point out that we have two really spectacular gardens in Kendrick Lake area. The Kendrick Lake Gardens right now are spectacular. So if you need something to do on a Saturday morning or afternoon and want to take a walk, that's a spectacular place to go. Another really gorgeous lawn in Ward 2 is at 17th and Iris. It's very close to my office, and I don't know where this guy gets his time, but it is really a beautiful place to go visit. So go drive by and wave at him. He's really a nice guy. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, Ward 1 will be having our next ward meeting on June 18th from 9 to about 10:30. Oh, okay, we've changed the time, new time. Holy Shepherd Lutheran Church at 9th and Kipling. And Councilman Abel and I have come to the conclusion that our meetings are best when people bring up the issues that are important to them, rather than necessarily having a guest speaker. So we want to hear what's on folks' minds, and that's the agenda, correct? Okay.
Council President Shakti.
Saturday, I have that day right, yeah. Saturday, 5 p.m., the Rock and Block Party at the Heritage Center. Free music, games, food truck, movie, beer garden with local beer, and the opening of the Estes Motel. So it's a packed schedule.
Councilmember Abel.
As usual, Councilwoman Johnson leaves me very little to say. We will be discussing the Tabor issue at the June 18th meeting, and any other issue the Ward 1 folks want to raise. So thank you.
Are you saying I leave you speechless?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't believe it. Councilmember,
Yes, sir.
Councilmember Coop has nothing. Councilmember Franks.
I just wanted to add, we had open forums at the Ward 4 meetings for quite a while, and then folks did actually want some speakers. So after the June meeting, which is about the development at C470 and the rezoning at C470 in Alameda, in July we're going to have a staff from the city talk about traffic, parking. That's become a big issue in our area. And then August is going to be code enforcement. And so in order to help staff best prepare, if you've got questions, please send those to either Councilor Wickman or myself so we can make sure staff's prepared to answer your questions. Thanks.
Great. Well, I have a couple things I wanted to touch on, and I'm glad Councilmember Vincent did, but it was a great article in the newspaper, and it really talked a lot. Our staff did a great job talking about the history and trying to honor and really where the Historical Preservation Society came from. And even though this is, you know, in the 1900s still, it's pretty cool. And I think they offered us a place to stay for a night. Not together. There's 2 rooms. Walt, there's 2 rooms. But it should be cool. So I'm excited to see that come onto the campus and be open for folks. We also had the motocross event at Thunder Valley, and our staff always does a great job, and that's an international event. So that was this weekend and was in the newspaper. Sylvie LaMontagne came in 4th in the National Spelling Bee, which is pretty cool to see on ESPN. So congratulations to her. And then we'll figure out a way to get this out, but Dr. Robert and Gretchen Garcia, who are residents of Ward 5, wrote a book called The Park, and it's about kind of the Bear Creek Greenbelt in the Stonehouse. And they've been walking down there for 4 or 5 years, and they just started to meet people and started to include stories from other people about the park and how much they like the park. And they give guided tours at the park for free on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays from 8 to 9:30 a.m. So it's really cool. I'm excited to look at the book, and there's some amazing wildlife pictures in here from the park. So check that out if you can. We might sell it. I don't know. If you want to borrow my copy, you can. And then, of course, Inspire Arts Week is going on. Lots of events and festivities, as well as Taste of the West Thursday night at the fairgrounds from 5 to 8 p.m. Councilor Wickman, did you miss something?
Yeah, it just occurred to me on the Rock and Block, there's a lot of things, but one thing I did want to mention is the Lakewood Historical Society is having their annual What It's Worth, and that's from 9 a.m. until I think 2 or 3. And what that is if you've got some heirlooms, you can bring it in, and for a charge, they'll have appraisers give you an idea of what it's worth. So again, that'll be at the Visitor Center there at the Heritage Center this Saturday.
Great. Michelle? Mr. Cox, Ms. Hodson.
Yes, please. I neglected to mention something. So during this Tabor conversation, we'll make sure to put Larry's PowerPoint on the website. And also, Councilor Shakti asked for some more specific, detailed information. We'll make sure that's available on the website, too. So as you're having these conversations over the next 6 weeks, you have access to that, and you can direct people to the website as well. So whatever information that we have, we'll make sure to post it on there. Just saying.
Thank you very much. Anything else for the good of the order? With that, we're adjourned at 9:32 p.m. Thank you.